You know, for a guy who prizes simplicity and kind of a minimalist approach to training, I sure do have a whole lot of isometric equipment. Honestly, I may have something of a bit of a problem when it comes to collecting this sort of thing, but my loss is your gain, because today I'm going to be assessing and reviewing all of it together into the pros, the cons of each, and what might be best for you depending on how you may be using isometrics or want to use isometrics in your fitness program. So first up, we will look at the IsoBow and the IsoFlow from Bullworker. They're really lightweight, they're portable, they come in great cases. One of the things I love about Bullworker is just a small little company that's kind of been on the forefront of isometric training since the beginning. Now, obviously, the IsoBow is one of the most cost-efficient and space-efficient pieces of equipment that you can use. I mean, hell, you could just pack it up like this and stuff it into your pocket, which makes it really ideal for travel. However, one of the things to note about this type of equipment, is this is similar to a lot of other pieces of isometric equipment I find out there, is when we have this stuff that's so small and so compact, it is fairly versatile. But one of the best ways to get the most out of any type of training is to apply force through an entire tension chain in a variety of ways. So in other words, we're trying to mimic a similar type of activation that you would get with classic barbell or machine work. And stuff like this is really good for kind of like, bicep curls and, pull aparts, back activation kind of exercises, but you're not going to get that full body, absolute max power type of activation that you would get, which may not be the best for overall strength, but stuff like this is a really good, what I would call like a crack filler type of exercise, something that you can use as a supplement to using things like the IsoFlow, which is better for things like deadlifting motions, standing press, chest press, seated row, that stuff, which is, in my opinion, far superior for developing the strength and muscle along the entire body because it mimics those basic fundamental exercises. The IsoFlow also gives you the ability to explore some of that self-resistance exercise by looping it through the carabiner. So if you're doing like alternating rear flies, one arm is working while the other one is kind of working against it. It's not isometrics. I know some people call it like a dynamic isometric, which is kind of like dehydrated water. If you're moving, it's not an isometric, but it at least gives you that option. Next up, we have the equipment options from WorldFit. We have the Iso Loop and the Iso Trainer. And the Iso Trainer, first and foremost, is very, very similar to the Iso Flow, in which it's basically just a big strap with adjustable handles on each end, but it is a bit of a longer strap, and it's also a wider strap, which I find is much more comfortable for things like chest presses or anything where you've got the strap kind of pushing against your body, a little wider area, a little bit more comfortable. And the longer strap gives it a little bit more of an easy versatility for things like standing overhead presses, especially if you're a taller individual. The handles are also quite a bit beefier and very good quality. They feel a lot more comfortable in the hand, especially when putting a lot of force into it, similar to deadlifting motions. So it's really good for those basic full body exercises. Plus, like with the IsoFlow, we have the ability to mimic a lot of single joint stuff, things like rear flies, bicep curls, and anything where we need our hands to be moving in a variety of positions and angles. The WorldFit Iso Loop. Now, full disclosure, of course, this is something that have a little bit of a nice sweet spot in my heart because, well, I developed it with WorldFit. It's an idea that I proposed to the company and they said, great, let's build one of these things. And it's just got a couple of neat little features and things that make it more easily used for isometric training. I carry one of these in my Taekwondo bag and do a lot of isometric training as a warm-up before my Taekwondo classes. Of course, it's one of the most compact, cost-efficient, and portable pieces of equipment you'll find. You can use it for a lot of unique pieces that have the strap looped around your body, like isometric squats, lunges, push-ups, and even rows to a large degree, which gives you the ability to have a bit of a hybrid isometric action to it, which is kind of a lot of fun. You can use it in a similar way to the Iso Trainer, where you're grabbing onto the straps and doing things like rows, rear flies and stuff, but without having the handles, you're not going to be able to get quite as much force into it. So if you're using it as a general warm-up, like with my Taekwondo, works perfectly well, but it's not the best option for using those exercises with as much force as possible if you really want to pursue muscle and strength with it. So let's start talking quantifiable metrics, because that's one of the biggest things that has plagued isometric training. So that's why Bullworker came out with the Iso bows where you have the steel bow and you have the bow classic, of course, where you have this ability to kind of measure how much force you're putting into the piece of equipment, theoretically correlating to how much tension is in your muscles. And it's a pretty simple system. It uses a spring that you can simply resist against, and you can adjust the type of spring in here. So you have heavier springs, lighter springs, depending on the exercises that you need. And it's also kind of a good way to see how much force you use with this handy little slider. It's a simple system, it works very well, and you can use this for some basic compound movements, things like rows and pulling and so forth, but I usually find it's not quite on par with the simple deadlifting type motions that you might have. You can kind of rig it with the IsoFlow to get a very similar motion, but it's similar to the ISO bow, where you're using it more for single joint, single muscle activations, which certainly can work very well, but I use this primarily for a bit of the crack filling supplemental isometric training. And of course, it depends on what kind of range you want. With the steel bow, you could see I got a little bit of range before it topped out. When you have a much longer unit, instead of feeling like you're at the limit of how much range the equipment will afford you. And then, of course, the Dragon Door ISO chain, one of the best quantifiable ways to quantify your isometric training, and it mimics those basic barbell compound lifts like presses, rows, deadlifts, and so on, and is definitely by far one of the best pieces of equipment if you really want to put a ton of force through your muscles as much as possible and not be hindered by the equipment. And more importantly, it gives audio feedback, which is greatly superior to visual feedback. When you're trying to look at something while you're holding an isometric, that's kind of like trying to go for a max deadlift while reading Shakespeare. It's something that gets your attention all messed up and confused and stuff. In fact, when I made the video series for the ISO chain, in many of those exercises, I was directly told by Dragon Door, make sure you tell people, don't look at the screen. Instead, you want to be able to set it for whatever level you want, just like you would be using a barbell, and then you're listening to the audio feedback, which is a total game changer. It is technically portable, but it's probably the least portable piece of isometric. I mean, this handle isn't exactly the lightest thing in the world, plus you got the chain and the spring and the plate. I used to bring it around to clients' home trainings that I used to do, and I ultimately ended up giving up on it because it is somewhat cumbersome to move around. It's something that's easy to move around your home and stuff, but it's not the easiest thing to travel with. So like any other piece of equipment when it comes to fitness, everything's got its pros and its cons, and it just depends on what you want and how isometric training fits in your fitness program. If you're just starting out with isometrics and you're not quite sure if it's your bag, I usually recommend going with a simple strap system like the ISO Trainer or the IsoFlow. It's very cost efficient, portable, doesn't take up a whole lot of time to set up. It's extremely versatile, and it at least gets you into the idea of how overcoming isometrics can really amplify your training, and it doesn't have a whole lot of upfront learning curve or cost associated with it. If you like the idea of quantification, but isometrics aren't really your main thing, you're just kind of using it as something you dabble in once in a while, the bows are a fantastic way to fill that niche of quantification, kind of get a few muscles shore up that may be a little bit weaker, and just something new that you can play with that can be a viable asset to the other aspects of your training. But if you know that isometrics are kind of your main thing that you're really focusing on for building muscle and strength, and you're experienced with it, and you really want to make sure you're getting as much out of it, especially from a strength standpoint, the ISO chain just simply cannot be beat. It's going to be the optimal way to put as much force and tension into your muscles, quantifying both time and tension to make sure you're making progress, and a great way to ensure that you're getting everything you want out of your isometrics as far as building muscle and strength. And if you're thinking, well, I just want to try isometrics to see if it has any validity to it, I'm always a big fan of just using whatever you have on hand. People have written in to me and say, oh, I just use the straps on my gymnastics rings as a strap trainer, or I'm just using some basic exercises that I find online. And these are great places to start to dabble with and understand if it's really something you want to pursue. Hell, my first isometric trainer was a simple bed sheet with some PVC handles attached to it. but it's probably not the best way to go long term. If you find that isometrics are something you certainly want to pursue in any shape or form in your training, you want some dedicated isometric equipment because it's a lot easier to set up, it's a lot easier to adjust. You don't have to take down your rings and then put them back up again and stuff. And it gives you just that little bit more detail on things that are purpose-built rather than trying to use a Swiss Army knife to repair your car. And I've got much more detailed reviews on most of this equipment. Here's a couple of them to get you started. And if you have any further questions, love to hear them down below in the comments section. Thank you so much for watching. Like, share, subscribe, all that sort of thing really helps me out. And as always, be fit and live free.